Hello, this is Jason from Liberate Raleigh, and this is another Liberate Raleigh video. This is actually going to be the first in what will be a series of videos on a topic that has become a bit of a hot topic given the election of Trump and a lot of discussion within libertarian circles, and that's going to be immigration. So what I'm referring to here when I say immigration, I'm referring to people from other countries relocating to within the United States. So this first video, I'm going to talk about how to apply libertarian property rights to the question of immigration to come to the correct libertarian solution as far as what the government policy should be, given that the government does exist and we can't get rid of it. What should the government's policy be? So if you have not watched my videos regarding foundations of anarchism, where I discuss what libertarian property rights are, I'm going to provide a link to that and you can watch that. I'll give a very brief description of what that is in this video. I also have a video on why I do not vote, where I discuss why the government is not based on consent. So that would be another very important thing to watch, because I make that assumption here and I extrapolate, build upon that in the arguments. So first of all, we have to apply libertarian property rights to the question. So libertarian property rights, just to give a very brief description here, that's where in order to legitimately acquire property, you have to either homestead unowned property or through voluntary transactions acquire property from another person. And of course, self-ownership is also assumed here. So you can control yourself and your body, and you control any property that you either homesteaded or that you acquired through voluntary transactions. So given that you control certain pieces, physical pieces of property, let's say you own an acre of land and you have a house on it, implied within that is that you can prevent whoever you want from entering that property or stepping foot onto it. So if you don't like somebody and you don't want them to visit you, you can keep them from coming onto your property. You can use force to prevent them from entering your property. That's perfectly legitimate if you own that property in the sense that you have acquired it via homesteading or voluntary transactions. Conversely, you do not have the right to prevent another person from allowing people entering their property. So let's say you have a neighbor, and your neighbor owns an acre of land right next to your land, and they want to have some people come over and visit. You do not have the right to prevent those people from visiting this person. That is not within your rights because you do not own that property. So if we move on to the question of the government, the problem with the government is that it does not legitimately own any property. Since the government does not rest on voluntary consent, nothing that it acquires is acquired through voluntary transactions. Taxation is simply another name for theft. So any property that they may acquire via taxation is not legitimately owned, and anything they may buy with taxed resources and money is similarly also not owned. And because it does not rest on consent, it cannot homestead property, because none of the resources that it may use to actually do this are legitimately owned. Therefore, it cannot acquire via homesteading any sort of property through the use of stolen resources. So because of this, any government border is not legitimate and nobody is under any obligation to respect it. So let's say the United States government has a border, let's just say the Canadian border or the Mexican border. Those are the two country-to-country borders. Because the government does not own any property legitimately, it has no right to prevent anyone from crossing that border. It is technically speaking a crime to prevent somebody from walking across this border because, as stated earlier, if you do not own the property, you cannot prevent people from entering a given area. So this pretty much should settle almost any argument over immigration. However, there's a lot of there's a lot of arguments that try to get around this, but none of them seem to hold any water. In fact, some of them are a bit bizarre. I'm going to cover a lot of different scenarios in future videos, but there are some confusions regarding property rights that I want to cover in this particular video. There's somebody that writes for the Lou Rockwell website, or at least his stuff gets posted there, who goes by the moniker Bionic Mosquito. He's not the only one to make the following argument, but he was the first person that I came across that made this argument. The argument is that people that subscribe to open borders policy, which is what I just described, the policy that the government has no right to prevent anyone from crossing the national borders, say for example the US-Mexican or US-Canadian border. This argument goes that, well, there is no libertarian right to open borders, quote-unquote open borders, because that would imply that all borders should be open, all property borders, all private property borders, every border should be open. I've not only heard him make this case, I've also heard Bob Murphy say that he stated this to Brian Kaplan. I heard this on a Tom Woods video where he said that he told Brian Kaplan that, well, you know that what you're actually arguing isn't open borders, because then you would have to accept that all borders should be open. This is a very interesting confusion because it seems to drop the context of the discussion. When you're engaging in a discussion regarding immigration, you're necessarily talking about a government policy. That's the only way that this is meaningful. And I'm not aware of any discussion where it's meant to be referring to anything other than that. So I don't understand why this is such a difficult concept to grasp, that when a person says that they are for open borders with respect to immigration, the borders they are referring to by context of the discussion are only national borders or government instituted borders. It is not private property borders that they're discussing. So I wanted to clear up that confusion. There's also another issue that I want to address. There are government programs that institute immigration. For example, say there's a group of 1,000 people in some other country. Let's just choose like France. There's 1,000 people in France, and the US government, let's say, has a program by which they will utilize funds that they have stolen via taxation, to take those 1,000 people and transport them from France into the United States. This is a common thing that happens over in Europe, wherein various Middle Eastern and Muslim-predominated countries, refugees are brought over via these government programs, or they don't necessarily have to be refugees, but just in general, government-controlled programs that bring people from other countries into a given country. And I see a lot of libertarians saying that, well, because of this, then immigration should just be stopped. We can't have open borders because of these programs. But the problem is these programs, this is a separate issue. You can oppose those programs without opposing people freely walking across and entering a country. So yes, these programs should be opposed, but it's also very important to understand precisely why they should be opposed. It is not the fact that they are immigration programs that they should be opposed. It is the fact that they are government programs. Of course, the government is going to ruin and make a mess of having people immigrate into the country when they are in control of the situation, and it's a government program. That's true of any government program. So you can't use these programs as arguments against free and voluntary immigration or movement from one area to another. There's a couple other property rights-based arguments that I've heard people make to oppose immigration. And one of them is, and I've heard Stefan Molyneux make this argument before. He says, he tries to draw the analogy between restricting immigration into the United States and locking your house. But again, the problem here is that analogy would assume that a particular person or group of people owns the entire landmass of the United States and would therefore have the right to prevent people from entering this area. But no person or group of people owns the entire landmass of the United States. Certainly the government doesn't, as I've already explained. The government has no property, no legitimate property that it has acquired via proper homesteading or voluntary transactions. So this argument doesn't follow. When you lock your doors to your house to prevent people from entering, yes, you own your house. So therefore you have the right to prevent people from entering, but you don't own the entire landmass of the United States. Nobody does. So you can't make this analogy. It simply doesn't follow. And there's one other thing that I want to touch on in this video, and it's something that I read in a Christopher Cantwell essay. He said that national borders should be privatized. So the problem here is it's a misunderstanding of what should be done with respect to national borders. He seems to be assuming that, yes, the borders should exist, they should just be managed privately, and that, I don't know, I guess that people, private institutions should be preventing people from crossing over into the United States. But the misunderstanding is that because the government does not legitimately own any of this property, the borders are necessarily illegitimate. So the question is not privatizing them, it's simply eliminating them. They simply should not exist at all. It's not a matter of, yeah, oh no, this border here is fine. It would be great. It just needs to be enforced through private means. No, that doesn't follow. What should happen is that the border should not exist. Now, if people voluntarily homestead various pieces of property after that border is eliminated, that's fine. They can prevent people from entering their property to their heart's content. But in lieu of until that happens, there is no reason, there is no rational basis for saying that that border should be privatized. To make another analogy here to make this point more clear, it would be like if somebody said, well, you know what we need to do with the IRS is we need to privatize it. We need to just turn it into a private company or outsource what it does to a private company, and it just needs to be privatized. Well, the problem there is the IRS is an institution that engages in large-scale theft. It has no legitimate basis to even exist at all. So you can't say, well, we should just privatize it. No, the IRS shouldn't exist. It needs to be eradicated. It should not be privatized. It just needs to be torn apart and just dropped in the wastebasket. So I hope that this is pretty much the main things I wanted to cover in this video. I wanted to start with a basis of what the libertarian property rights argument against restricting immigration into a country is. And in future videos, I'm going to address a lot of the ways that people, in particular libertarians, attempt to get around this. The main ones that you've most likely heard, people refer to welfare. They try to make arguments relating to welfare or public property or voting blocks. There's also arguments relating to race and culture and IQ and crime. I plan on covering that in a video. But for now, I just want to get the basic property rights argument and address, and I wanted to address some particular confusions relating to property rights that I've seen people make. So I hope this has been informative, and I will see you in the next video. Have a great day.